Hi there, Year 11. Just a quick revision video on inequality in Bristol. So, we're going to be looking at a couple of locations in Bristol, what we refer to as wards, so small parts of the city when we think about inequality in Bristol. We're going to be looking at Cabot, which is in the inner city of Bristol, and Stockwood, which is in the suburbs of Bristol. Now, when we say inequality, what we're referring to is differences in the quality of life between these two places. So, it could be differences in employment. It could be differences in the access to education or healthcare. Largely, it's going to be around differences in wealth and how this might impact various elements of life as well. Now, if we start by looking at what you can see on the screen there, you can see that in Cabot, which is the inner city area, marked as 23 on the map there, we have a relatively low percentage of people that have been born in the UK living within this region of Bristol. Now, the percentage is less than 70% of people born in the UK make up the demographic of Cabot. So, what that means is actually we have quite a lot of migrants in Cabot, and you can see that more than 10%, 11.5% of people living in Cabot have lived in the UK for less than 2 years. So it is quite a popular location, a popular ward of the city for migrants. If we look then at Stockwood and compare this to Cabot, what we can see there is that the percentage of people that are born in the UK and living in Stockwood is really quite high, more than 95%. And where we have got migrants living in this area, it's most significant that they've lived there for longer periods of time. For example, 2.6% of those migrants have lived in the UK for 10 years or more. So we can see that Cabot is going to be a significantly more ethnic diverse region than Stockwood because it is more popular with migrants. Now, if we move on to look at some data which supports the inequality that we've got between these two regions, what we can see is that, first of all, we've got some data here about life expectancy. Now, when we're looking at data around life expectancy, what that tells us about is the healthcare, really. So, if we have a little look there at Cabot, first of all, and the male life expectancy. The male life expectancy in Cabot is 74.7 years. That's how long we estimate that men will live within that ward of Bristol. Now, that is slightly lower than the Bristol average, which you can see in the bottom row of that table is 78.4 years. Now, Stockwood is slightly higher than Bristol's average. So, what we can say there is that the healthcare in Stockwood is clearly much stronger than in Cabot and is actually uh, slightly above the Bristol average. Now, what that might be down to and what that might look like in Stockwood is that we actually have fewer people per doctor. So it's much easier for people to be able to get a doctor's appointment if they are unwell. It might also be that people within Stockwood are able to afford to pay for private healthcare. For example, if they were requiring a hospital appointment, they wouldn't have to wait on NHS waiting lists, and therefore they might get serious illnesses seen to faster in some cases where they need diagnostic appointments. That might not be the case for in Cabot. If we have a look at female life expectancy and see how that fits the pattern, well, actually, both locations, Cabot and Stockwood, are slightly lower than the Bristol average of 82.7 years. Now, the Cabot average and the Stockwood average are not too different from each other. So there's only 0.2 years between those two estimates there. That doesn't really fit the pattern that we might expect to have seen and the pattern that we do see with regards to male life expectancy. So we could say there that perhaps the data we've got for Cabot is a little bit more of an anomaly in comparison to the male life expectancy. If we then move on to look at crime rate, we've got crime offence rate per 1,000 people in the population there. Now, in Cabot, we've got 500 as our crime rate there, which is 5 times the Bristol average. Okay. It's actually slightly lower than the Bristol average in Stockwood. Now, that could largely be down to unemployment rates in Cabot being higher than in Stockwood. That might feed into this. But it is quite significant that Cabot's crime rate is 5 times higher than the Bristol average. And that does really signify, by looking just at that set of data there, that there is a distinct inequality between these two regions of Bristol. Moving on to look at education. And the measure that we've got for education is attainment 8. What that's referring to there is GCSE data and thinking about how well students perform in their GCSEs. That's what we need to understand attainment 8 scores as. Now, in Cabot, we can see that the attainment 8 is 39. It's slightly lower, quite considerably lower actually there, than the Bristol average of 47.7. Whereas in Stockwood, it's more aligned with that 47.7. The score in Stockwood is 46 for attainment 8. Now, some of the reasons why we might see that pattern, we could link that back to migration patterns. We know that Cabot is a more ethnically diverse area, more culturally diverse area. We might see that in schools there are a lot more language barriers if there are more migrants within the region. And that might feed into some of the challenges around education within this area. It might be that schools are oversubscribed, for example, in Cabot, that class sizes are significantly larger. But it does indicate overall that the quality of education is going to be higher in the suburbs, in Stockwood, in Bristol. Okay. We've then got some data about cars per household. Now, this really links in now to wealth. Okay. Now, we can see that the average number of cars per household in Cabot is 0.55. Now, clearly, we can't have 0.55 of a car. So, what that's suggesting is that not every household in Cabot is likely to have a car. Whereas if we look at Stockwood, the average number of cars per household is 1.3. Now, of course, again, we can't have zero point 0.3 of a car. And therefore, what that's suggesting is that on average in Stockwood, people are likely to have one or more cars per household. Now, in Bristol, the average is around about 1 car a household, slightly above at 1.04. So Cabot is actually significantly lower than the Bristol average there, whereas Stockwood is more closely aligned, but still above the Bristol average. Now, having cars in the household or having however many cars per household you have, that does indicate wealth because it's thinking about how many cars is each household able to afford. So we can suggest that the wealth in Stockwood is higher than that of Cabot. Now, finally, we're looking at overcrowded households. This might link into deprivation levels, although it may, on some level, reflect perhaps cultural differences and cultural practices in some parts of the city. But we can see that in Cabot, the percentage of households that are overcrowded is 8%, which is higher than the Bristol average of 5.2, whereas in Stockwood, it's lower, it's 3% in comparison to the Bristol average. So that would indicate to us that Stockwood is less deprived than Cabot. Now, all of these data sets do suggest that there is a significant inequality which is evident between Cabot and Stockwood, where Stockwood is a more wealthy ward with a higher quality of life, and Cabot, we could say, is a less wealthy ward with what we can see here is possibly a lower quality of life for this ward of Bristol. Now, we can link that into some of the factors which we've explained. It could also be tied into some factors. For example, deindustrialization might be one of the causes of inequality that we see in Bristol as well. But it is important that we know the data that we've got here and that we can revise that so that we are prepared for those longer, possibly 8-mark questions that we might see cropping up about inequality in Bristol.